have control structures in PHP. You'll get to know what they are shortly. Basically, when your PHP code is running, there is probably need to control or maybe say manage how the code is running from which side to run another, and then if it's a line of code, we want to run this line of code, skip it and run another one, or maybe say run this line of code and repeat it a certain number of times. All that falls under what we call control flow statements or control structures. So in PHP, and as the same as any other programming language, we have about two of them, two or three, but we are first going to start with these two, which is one is the conditional statements, or what we call the conditional control flow statements. Here you determine which line of code you're going to run based on the result of a particular condition you have checked. So if you're trying to make a decision that I want to run line number 1 up to line number 5, and there is a condition that I need to check and make sure it's met, and then I can run that, then you go with that one. And if you want to go ahead and run something else, again, you also have the opportunity to do so. So and the second one is going to be iteration statement. With this, we shall be able to repeat a particular line of code a certain number of times. And another one is also going to be when we are running it in what we called breaks and then continue statements, which we shall see later on. And later, we're also going to look at the PHP arrays. And then the last, we are going to be looking at what we are calling the exercise. Okay, so let's continue. So under control structures, we're going to be starting with the brief description or the definition, or maybe say background or overview. So think of PHP control structures as a way of you trying to manage, or which I would call control, the flow of your execution, or maybe say the order in which the lines of code in the PHP that you have written is going to be run. And they allow us to make decisions. They allow us to repeat the code, maybe say a certain number of time, which we call looping, and also under different conditions that you're going to see in this example, or maybe say in this topic. And some of them includes the conditional statements, the iteration statements, and then the breaks, and then the continue, which we're going to look at. So let's start with the conditional statements. With the conditional statements, we have what we call the control flow. So here we just manage, or maybe say rearrange or control the order in which our lines of code are going to be executed. In short, we control the flow of our program using certain decisions. And the decisions, if you remember your English class well, then they are what we call the ifs. Say the if ones, the if twos, the if threes. So we're also going to try to look at borrow that same idea from English, but then this time around implement it in PHP. So under control flow statements, or maybe say the conditional statements, we have about 3 or 4 different if blocks, or maybe say if statements that we're going to look at. Starting with the first one, which is the if. With the if, we are going to simply make a decision, and then after that decision, we're going to execute that line of code in case the decision turns out to be true. And once the decision turns out to be false, we are going to see nothing. In other words, there is no another line of code which is going to be run. So if maybe say you find yourself in a scenario where you can only do something, and you're only going to be able to do that particular thing once something has happened, or maybe say once something has occurred, or once you have been given the permission, then what you're looking at in the context of control flow statements in PHP is the if statements. So the if statements here, this is the syntax. Just have the if, the word if, then the condition in the bracket, and then we open our curly bracket, and then inside the curly bracket, between the opening curly bracket and then the closing curly bracket, we put the number of codes or the lines of code that we want run, or that we want it to be executed when the condition that we're checking turns out to be true. If the condition that we're checking turns out to be false, then the code which is within the opening and the closing curly bracket will not be executed, or it will not be run. So let's take on this example, assuming we're trying to ask ourselves uh, whether you have passed this course or you have not passed. Okay, so this is a code that we have that we want to check. So assuming we have a max or a score that we have stored in a variable called score. So we want to know whether that particular mark is above the pass mark or below the pass mark. And the way we're going to do it, we're going to form a condition. If you remember the operators that we looked at, you first go ahead and form a condition using the comparison operators. So for instance, this one here, we want to know whether the max that I use as is greater or equals to 50. If that particular max is greater than or equals to 50, then the condition is going to be a yes. So we ask ourselves, is 85 greater or equals to 50? Then we say that yes, it's true, it's greater than 50. So in that case, we're going to enter the body of our if, and the body of our if starts from the opening curly bracket up to the closing curly bracket. So anything within the opening and the curly bracket is what we call the code inside the body of our if statement, which will be run when the condition is true. So in this case, our condition is true. We are going to run that, and we're going to see an output on the screen as you passed. Then the second if is the if else. Now, with the if else statements, we shall be able to at least perform a particular action, irrespective of the result of our decision. So whether the decision turns out to be false or whether the decision turns out to be true, we are still going to perform a certain action, no matter what. So let's make an assumption that we are still using the other example, whereby we check whether the max is greater than 50 or equals to 50. Now, if the max is greater than 50, that's when we go ahead and perform a particular action. But in case the max is less than 50, then we do nothing. Now, with the if else, we are still going to perform a particular action even when the max is less than 50. So the conditions in, or maybe say the code inside the if block is what is going to be run when the condition turns out to be true. Then the code inside the else block is what is going to be run when the condition is false. So when our condition turns out to be false, then we enter the first body, the one between the opening and a curly bracket of the if. Then if the condition turns out to be false, so we're gonna enter the body, or enter inside the body delimited by the opening and then the closing bracket of the else. That's when we shall run it. So let's look at this example. It's almost the same as the other one. So this time round, we're going to at least have an output which is saying you have passed or you have failed, either of that depending on the result of the condition. So now we have a variable called score, which is storing max 40. And our conditions is still the same as in the previous example. We check whether the max is greater or equals to 50. And if it's greater or equals to 50, we are going to print you have passed. But if it's less than 50, then we are going to print you have failed. So since our max 40 or our score 40 is less than 50, then the output is going to be fail. The third one is the if else. imagine a time when you want to check more than one condition at a time. Say you're given two different conditions that you want to check. For instance, in a grading system, or maybe say we're trying to calculate the tax for a given salary. Now, in a grading system, we always grade somebody whether they are passed with a score of a grade of A, grade of B, grade of C, up to probably a O. So, depending on your range of the marks, we're going to assign you a particular grade. Now, in that case, we have to check for your marks in a different range. Let me say between the range of 80 to 90, the range of 70 to 80, the range of 60 to 70, the range of 50 to 60, the range of 40 to 50. All those ones will form a particular condition. And with the first two if statements, we can't go ahead and use it. The reason is simple. We have only one condition that can be passed there. So that's where the third condition now comes in, which is the else, if statements. So here we're going to chain our conditions. And after we have chained it, if you remember how the chain works, you follow from one up to another. You follow one, then after you finish one, you go to the other one, then you go to the other one, then you go to the other one in that particular kind of like a sequence. So the syntax is almost the same as what we have already seen, but the only difference here is that we add a condition, or maybe say we add an else if block, which is going to help us to add a new condition. So here we start still with the if the condition one, then if the condition one is true, we're going to enter the block of the first if, which has a condition one, then we run the code which is there. And we are only going to go to the other conditions or even the else block whenever the condition one or whenever the first condition fails. So in case condition one turns out to be false, we shall go to the second condition and check. So in the second condition, again, we check and see whether it's true or false. So if it's true, then we are going to enter the body of the if else with condition 2. The body of condition 1, the if of condition 1, will only be executed or will only be touched when that condition 1 is true. In case the condition 1 is false, we are going to skip the entire body. Even if they had 100 lines between that opening and curly bracket, we are going to skip it and just move to check the condition 2. So when the condition 2 again also turns out to be false, we're going to skip its body and move to the next condition. We can have as many conditions as we want. We are not limited. But because of performance, you will always have to limit yourself. Then if we have like 3 or more conditions and we have tested all of them and they have failed, then we have a fallback. Our last option now is using is falling in the else. So inside the else, that's when we can go ahead and enter and we can run it. So if the first condition fails, then we check the second condition. If the second condition fails, we check another condition. If there is no another condition, we have only condition 1 and 2, then we're going to check all those conditions. Any condition that turns out to be true, we are going to enter its body or enter the inside the opening and curly bracket there and execute the condition which is true. But if all of them fails, then our last option is the else part. So we are going to fall back to the else and do whatever task is defined inside the else. But if one of these conditions turns out to be true, we are going to skip the else part also. We shall not touch it. So we just start in that particular order. Start with condition 1, check it. If it's true, you enter its body and then you do the task which is defined there. And in case it is true, the rest of the conditions, whether there were many conditions down, starting from condition 2 going down, including the else, we are going to skip it. That's when our condition 1 turns out to be true. But if condition 1 also is false, then we continue in that chain and we keep checking until we reach. So let's say this is an example. We have a score and we have an output or maybe say an appreciation that we're going to give the student, or maybe say somebody who has a max within a particular range. We can assume that for those who have scored above 90 or 90 and above, we're going to give them excellent. And those who have scored be above 50 or 50 and above, we're going to tell them, yeah, good job. But if now it's below 50, then you can say not so good, or maybe say you have tried, maybe say next time you're gonna do better or something like that. So in this case now, for us to be able to display such kind of messages, or maybe say tell people such kind of things, then we have to make sure that we have added some other conditions that is able to achieve that task. Okay, so this is how it's going to be. So we start from the first condition, say condition one, and then we say if score is equals to, is greater or equals to 90. If it's greater or equals to 90, then we shall go ahead and just enter the body of the first condition and we execute that. In that case, our output is going to be excellent. But if it's false, which in this case is going to be false because 70 is not greater than 90 and neither is it equals to 90. So in that case, we are going to skip it out and then we move to the next one. Okay. So another thing is maybe say when it is, we go to the next condition, which is condition number two. So in the second condition, we are saying that if maybe say the marks or the score is greater or equals to 50, then we print a good job. So 70 is greater than 50. So in that case, this condition is going to turn out to be true. So since it's true, we are going to enter inside the body of the second condition and in that second if, and then we can do whatever task is found there. And the only thing which is found there is displaying a good job. So our output is going to turn out to be good job. Now, since this one here, as this condition has already turned out to be true, then we're going to skip whatever is remaining down there. That means the else part, we are not going to touch it. We were only going to touch the else part, which is displaying try again, in case all these conditions had failed. If maybe say we had checked for the case where 70 is greater or equals to 90 and then we have failed, it was false, then we come to the 70 being greater or equals to 50 and it's find out that it's again false, then that's when we would go to the else. So we go only to the else part only when all the conditions which has been specified, we have tested all of them and they're all turning out to be false. But if one of them is still turning out to be true, then the else is not going to be touched. Okay, so let's look at the loops and the practice example. We're going to do it after. Now, those are the control statements or the conditional structures are the ones that we use whenever we want to determine whether we should run a particular code or not. Now, with the iteration statements or the loops, we are not just going to determine whether to run the code or not. We are going to determine whether to run it and also whether to repeat that particular line of code a certain number of times. So there's going to be a time that you want to repeat your statements or maybe say your code for a certain number of time. Now in that case, what you would do, you are going to you're going to go ahead and start repeating a particular line of code a certain number of times depending on how your condition is running. So how it works with the iteration statements or the loops, or we are going to use it if we want to repeat those particular line of code depending on the number of times that we want. So the code itself is going to help us. We're going to use the code. We're going to use the loops to avoid what we call duplication. So, and at the end of the day, you're going to realize that, okay, everything that you have done is a little bit running very fast and it's going to save you a lot of time. So some of the the loops that we have in PHP includes the for loop, the while loop, the do while loop. Those are the three common ones. And there is what we call a for each loop also, which we're going to look at later, especially when we start touching arrays. So let's start with the for loop first. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, okay, so let's look at loops. Okay, well, sorry about that. Now, with for loops, the only time that I would prefer choosing a for loop, first of all, is when I know the number of times I want to repeat my code. So, if maybe say I know that in this race we are going to run like probably 10 laps, 5 laps, or maybe say 100 laps, then that is probably when I will be sure that I can use a for loop. So if you know that we're going to run around this place for about 5 times, then the for loop is going to be a good part. But if you don't know the number of times you're going to run, then in most cases it's not a good choice to go ahead and pick a for loop. Anyway, in a for loop, we're going to have three different portions. We're going to have the part which is called the initialization, and that's the part which is basically close to, or it's almost the same as what we call variable declaration. And for it, we're going to only do it once. Just as in our PHP, we declare a variable once. So in the initialization variable, we are declaring what we call the loop variable, which we do it only once, just as we declare a variable in PHP also only once. That's why we're going to say it's going to be done only once. Then there's the condition part. So the condition is the same as the condition that we had in the if statements, which we keep checking each and every time that we run. So if we run one round and it's over, then we check the condition before we go for the next round. Then after the next round is done, we check the condition again to determine whether we should go for the next round again. So the condition is going to determine whether we should go for the next round or not. If the condition says you have already finished a number of rounds, so you can stop there. But if the condition still says yes, you add more around, then you continue running for all those number of times. Then the third one is what we call the incrementation or the decrementation. Now this is going to keep track of the number of times we have, anyway, not just the number of times, but there's going to be a time that we want to keep the number of times we have run already. So if maybe say we are increasing it, so we are starting to count from one. So we have run the first round already, then we go the second round already, we go the third round already. So the incrementation part is going to keep increasing it by one. So the total number of times that we have already run the round, I mean the race, then it's going to put it inside there and keep it for us. Then lastly, we may be coming from up then down. So if we are decreasing, that is starting from 10 and then counting down, then we have to keep decreasing it by 1, or maybe say by 2, or depending by any other number that we want to reduce it. So if we have gone we are going to run 10 times, we can say, okay, we're going to start from 10, then we count down to 1. So we can start 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. That's what we are going to be having on the third part. So after each and every round, we either increase or we decrease depending on our starting point, or depending on what we want to achieve at the end of the day. That's basically what a for loop is doing. So this is the syntax of the for loop. We said it has three parts: the initialization part, which we said is just basically a variable declaration part, which is going to run only once at the beginning of the loop. Then the condition. The condition part is what is going to keep us repeating the loop the number of times that we want. So it's going to tell us whether we should keep repeating, or maybe say we can stop where we are, or on the total number of times we have repeated. Then the increment or the decrement, like I've said, is going to be either increasing or maybe say decreasing for us the number that we have already round. Say we want to stop at 10, and we can decide to start counting from 1. So if we decide counting from 1, then this part is going to be the increment. So it will keep increasing it by 1 until we reach 10. If we say we're going to start from 10 and then count down, then this part is going to turn to the decrement instead of the increment. Then the code that we want to repeat is going to be inside the body of our for loop within the opening and the closing curly bracket. So the opening and curly bracket is going to be where we shall put our code which we are going to repeat. So this is an example down here. It has a for the variable. So the first portion is variable declaration and initialization. So we create a variable, and after we have created our variable, we go ahead and move today at the second part, which is the condition. So this condition is what is going to determine whether we should keep on repeating the loop or not. And our condition for now, since we're going to stop at 5, it's checking whether we have already reached 5 or not. Uh, the initialization here, the variable we're going to initialize, is going to keep track of the number of times we have already repeated our loops in most cases. So if it's a for loop, it's going to keep for us the number of times we have repeated our loop. So in this case, we're just going to be having a variable I. So in the condition part, we are going to keep checking whether I has already reached the number of times that we want to repeat the loop. So if maybe say we want to run the race 5 times, or maybe say run around the field 5 times, so we're going to keep counting, and then for the first round we ask ourselves, have we already done 5 times? No. If it's not yet 5, then we continue. So the value of I is always going to keep on recording the number of times that we have repeated, or maybe say run around the field. Then on the third part, we keep increasing. So if we start from 1, our current value of I in the initialization part, our current value of I is equals to 1. So we start from 1, but we want to count up to 5. Then on the third part, the increment part, we are increasing that value by I. So the first time that we run a loop, we increase it by 1. The next time, we also increase it by 1. We continue increasing like that until we have finished the total number of times we're supposed to run around the field. And how do we know we have finished? The condition is always going to tell us. And the condition is saying that anything which is in the variable I, if it's less than or equals to 5, you keep on repeating. But once it becomes greater than 5, then you stop repeating the loop. And what are we going to be repeating is what is inside at the opening and the closing curly bracket of the loop, which is what we call the body of the loop. So inside here, we're just displaying that number, say number 1, number 2, number 3. So we're going to see at the end of the loop, we're going to see number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and then number 5. Why? Because we're supposed to repeat this 5 times. Okay, that's basically the output that we're going to see. Then when it comes to the while loop, In most cases, the while loop is also almost the same as the for loop, but for it just a different syntax a little, and we always choose it whenever we don't know the number of times that we want to repeat the loop. Say, for instance, you want every time your code is running, you want the user to enter the password to, or maybe say enter a command to stop the code from running. So in that case, you don't know the time which you are going to run. You only know it when the user enter that command. So as long as the user has not yet entered the command to stop, you keep on running it. Say for instance, you are playing a game. You want to keep playing the game until you fail. So as long as you have not yet failed, you will keep on playing the game. So, or maybe say the game is counting the life. So in the life, your life is going to be the one determining whether the game should continue or not. So if the life is you're starting from 3 or maybe say 5, so every time you fail, the life decrease by 1. Then we keep on restarting again. If again you fail, it reduces by 1 until it becomes 0. Then that's when the game is going to stop. So that's basically where the for loop will come in. But now, if the condition here is the number of times we're going, or maybe say the time we're going to stop is supposed to be coming from an external interface, like probably a user entry, then the while loop will be your best friend. So the loop is going to always check the condition before it runs our code, just as in our for loop. So this is the syntax of a while loop. We say while, then the condition, and then the body of the while loop, or where we put the code that we are going to run when our while loop or when the condition is still true. So the code inside the opening and the curly bracket is what we are going to keep repeating as long as the condition is true. So we need to always make sure that we find a way of making the condition false. So this is an example. We declare a variable x, and then we want to say that we're going to repeat our code or our while loop as long as the value of x is still less than or equals to 3. So since we are starting from 1, we know that we're going to repeat this 3 times. So inside the while, we come to the condition first. We check, is x less than or equals to 3? Currently x has 1. So we are going to ask ourselves, is 1 less or equals to 3? Then we're going to say no. So since it's it's a yes, since it's a yes, we come inside here and then we print the value of x. Then we keep on repeating that until the condition becomes false. So on the last second line here, we have x plus plus. This is the increment. So this x plus plus is the same as x is equals to x plus 1. So it just simply means pick the current value of x, add 1 to it, and assign all the value back to x. So after this line, x will become 2. We come to the condition and we say that our x is 2, which is this condition is still true. We come and repeat again, x is going to become 3. Then I come to the condition again and ask, is 3 less than or equals to 3, which is true. Then you come and run this code, echo count, then x. Then now we increase x by 1, which now x is going to become 4. Then later on, we come to the condition here and then ask ourselves, is 4 less than or equals to 3? Then it's going to tell us no. So it's going to turn to false. So that's when we stop repeating the while loop. Okay, so that's going to be the output there. Then for the do while is almost the same as the while loop. The only difference here is for the do while, you first do a particular task or you perform a particular task, then you can go and check the condition. So in this case, we are very sure that our code is going to run at least once any other time. So if that's what you want in your scenario, that you want the code to always at least run once, depending on whether the condition is true or false, then you are going to choose a do while. Okay, so this is the syntax. We first, that under the do part, we put the code that we want to repeat. Then the while part is where we're going to check the condition. So in other words, it's the same as what we have in the while loop, but just picking the condition and bringing it down here. Okay, so that's gonna be an output. Then for the for each, the for each is basically important when we're dealing with arrays, which we're going to see ahead of us. So for each is basically what we're going to use for our arrays at any point in time. And it's going to run through our arrays. The arrays could be made up of what we call the key value pair, which have the key. The key could be the name, then the value of the name will be our value. So the key is probably age, then the value of the age is our value. Say for instance, our age is 20, so it's going to be age colon then 20. If the name is Daniel, it's going to be name colon Daniel. So name is our key, then value is Daniel. Then for the age is our key, then 20 is the value. So that's the what we call the key value pairs in arrays. So it's going to be a little bit easier for us when we use for each to handle our arrays, as you're going to see later on. So let's just give an example here. So say we give an array, and then we say that this is our array. So for instance, the array is probably array of colors. So we're going to say for each array, we mentioned the name of the array as. The as part of it is now we're trying to extract the value inside our arrays, or the items inside our arrays. Just think of an array just as a variable, but now this time around a variable which is able to contain more than one value at a time. Okay, then maybe we go to another important one, which is a name or the key value pair arrays. So here we have the name, and then the key is name, and then the value of the name is Alice. So Alice is now our value. The key is age, then 25 is now our value. So if you want to use it again in that way, this is a syntax in this case. So for each the array is person as key then value, and it's going to be like that. Okay, well, I think that should be enough for now. I don't feel like introducing arrays right now. I'm going to maybe say introduce it later on, and then we can do some practice. So until then, I wish you a good day.